Greetings and salutations in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Welcome to Region Resplendence, a program of the American Baptist Churches of Greater Indianapolis. I'm 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶, Executive Minister of the region and your host for today. The American Baptist Churches of Greater Indianapolis is one of the 33 regions of the American Baptist Churches in the USA and Puerto Rico, comprised of approximately 15,000 members in 40 congregations in the city and suburbs of Indianapolis, Indiana. Of those 40 congregations, 16 are of European ancestry, 8 are Burmese immigrants and former refugees, 7 are descendants of enslaved Africans, 4 are Central and South American immigrants, 4 more are blended, meaning that they're still predominantly European, but there's a significant gathering of others. And the last congregation is of African immigrants from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Burundi, and Rwanda. And I, yours truly of Caribbean origins, have the honor and joy to serve this region. We call our program Region Resplendence because we are a tapestry of God's diverse peoples, teeming with God's beauty, resplendent in God's color and brilliance, and we are set forth in an America at a time like this to shine for and in the glory of God. There are many stories in our region, and each one reflects the light and glory of God. And today we are blessed to have in the office with me the Reverend Judith 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶, a retired minister of the gospel here in the ABCGI, last served at Garfield Park Baptist Church, and a former president of the ABC USA. And this is why I begin with someone so large in history and so wonderfully placed in our region. Judy, welcome. I'm so happy that you have the honor and the history of being the first in this series that we hope to go on for a long, long time. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for asking me.
So glad to have you. Well, look, for people who still don't know you, but maybe especially for those who do, in a couple of sentences, 3 sentences, or maybe 5, 10 words, who is Judy 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶?
Judy 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶 is a wife, a mother, a daughter, a sister, a cousin, and a friend. I am someone who loves and is centered in my faith by contemplative practices, by time in nature and with my family, both my immediate family and beyond. One who is blessed to perform and to hear music that touches my soul deeply. I love to read, and rich conversations are important to me.
Well, so wonderful, because we're hoping to have a rich conversation with you today. And, you know, I was remembering only just before you arrived that you are a musician. Tell us a little bit about your experience with music, your career in music, and what just gives you life through music.
Music has always blessed me, and I remember I was in the 3rd grade when we came home and my parents had purchased a piano. That started me on a path. Many, many, many piano lessons, voice lessons as well. Participated in anything musical I could do in high school, and then went on to major in music in college with piano as my major instrument. So did a junior recital my junior year in college.
Wow.
And one of
you
my
alone or along with others?
I shared it with a friend who was doing a voice recital, so we each did a half recital.
Do you remember what year that was?
That would have been 77.
My goodness. I'm remembering that a good friend of mine, her name is Rhonda, she has a wonderful voice. She and I did a recital. The one recital I did I was piano, she was, and it was, I remember the date very well. It was the Sunday, the 3rd of July, 1977.
Close. Mine would have been in the fall. I think it was October or November.
Okay,
and,
excellent.
That was a thrill. One of my retirement goals is to try to go back and look at some of that music and pick it back up.
Yeah. Sometimes if your fingers are rusty, but yours are probably not. It takes a while. So, when I was doing organizational leadership studies, I came across a definition of authenticity that suggests that what creates people's authenticity is some seminal experience in life, and especially some kind of traumatic experience in life, some special experience. As you think back on your childhood and on your teenage years, is there any experience or a number of experiences, joyful or painful, that have created Judy?
There are a couple of experiences. Growing up, we lived in a neighborhood full of families, and I enjoyed riding my bike back and forth. And one day I was riding my bike and a boy threw a rock at me, and I picked up a rock and threw one back.
Did it hit you or did it miss you?
It missed me, but I,
you threw it
can't
back.
throw anything, nicked him in the ear. So, about 10 minutes later, a knock at the door, and his mother is there loaded for telling my mother that she needed to discipline me heartily. And my mother said, nobody tells me how to discipline my child. And my mother stood up for me. That experience has stayed with me as kind of a justice experience and unconditional love. Then in high school, I was part of the first desegregated graduating class in Indianapolis public schools. So I learned from and appreciated diverse friendships and diverse relationships in high school that I think set me on a path of welcome and acceptance and inclusion that I value to this day.
That's so important. It sounds as though, and we'll talk some more about your ministry and your service over the last recent couple of decades. But it sounds like very, very early you were being called into a ministry of advocacy and a ministry in general before you even knew it.
I think I was. I loved Jesus from a very early age. Did not have female role models in ministry at all. I say that I'm the first woman I heard preach.
Wow.
And I'm pretty sure that's true. I can't remember hearing somebody else, another woman, preach before I preached my first.
Tell us how you got that break to preach.
I was serving in my home church. My ministry kind of evolved from one level of call to a deeper level of call. And my home church at that time was Covenant Baptist Church next to the north entrance to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. The pastor was going to be gone on race day, asked if I would preach. I agreed to preach. And the lectionary text for the day was Isaiah 6. Whom shall I send? Here I am, Lord, send me. That moment really resonated and became the core of my call.
Were you still a teen at that time? Or
no? Okay. We had 2 kids. I was a young married woman. Didn't have a dream of doing this at all. Thought if I did anything, I would maybe do a degree in religious education.
So we'll tap back in a moment to your call for ministry and your journey through seminary, etc. But what did Fred is Judy's husband, and I'll ask her in a minute to tell us a little more about her family and about Fred, how she met Fred. But what did Fred think when he knew you were going to preach that Sunday, and what did he think after you preached? Was he in the congregation?
He was in the congregation. He, and along with maybe 8 other people on race day.
Oh, right, that's right.
Right. When I started to share that I was feeling a call and it was being affirmed by others in the congregation, Fred said, I knew it.
Wow, that's wonderful.
I knew it. Yeah, it hasn't always been easy for us, but he has been very supportive and affirming and
Tell us more about him. Tell us how you met and how you knew that he was the one, or how he knew you were the one, or both.
That's a fun story. I recently told some friends that we met in the back of a van. And there's
go ahead.
there's some truth to that, but let me explain. We were in college at Ball State University. We had both signed up through a campus ministry to go on a winter retreat, heading from Muncie, Indiana, up into Ontario, Canada, where we would meet up with college students from Canada and have a retreat together. I climbed into the back seat of the van because I was quite the introvert.
That's where young people enjoy the rides the most. I don't know
Right.
why.
But I didn't want to be around anybody. I didn't know anybody particularly that was going. I had really pushed myself out of my comfort zone to go on this retreat. So I sat down and there was a stack of things next to me, one of which was C.S. Lewis's screw tape letters.
Oh, yes.
And I'm like, wow, whoever's reading that must be really smart, really smart. And this handsome young man came and sat there, and that was Fred. We started to connect and
exciting.
Moved into a wonderful relationship from there.
Great.
Yes.
So I know about Jeremy. Jeremy is not your only child, is he?
Right. No.
Okay. Tell us about your family and how in ministry, your family has held together.
We have 2 children. Jeremy, who is married to Megan, and they live in...
I remember Jeremy because my last boy is Jeremy. I'm partial.
That's right, yeah. And Jeremy is around in American Baptist circles. And he and his wife Megan live in San Diego. Our daughter Catherine and her husband David live in 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶, California, which is not terribly far. They're only 2.5 hours apart. We appreciate that very much when we get to go see them.
Yeah.
For our son particularly, my call to ministry came, he was young, but I was evolving in my home congregation. He did not experience some of the stuff that happens to preachers' kids. Our daughter was affirmed and loved in that congregation, and when I took another call, she was then the pastor's kid. And there were challenges for her. For both of our kids, whatever challenges there were offset because they were both very involved in the American Baptist Youth of Indianapolis and Indiana, serving on the board, being convention chair people, doing all sorts of things. And our daughter participated in Youth Leader Corps, and that was such a blessing for her. It was wonderful to watch her bloom and claim the leadership gifts that were present.
No, Garfield Park was not your first pastorate. Am I hearing that?
I pastored in my home congregation.
Okay, so your pastor became a professional race car watcher, and what happened?
I was doing music and education in the church, and when a broader call came for me, and our lives were not such that we were ready to uproot and go someplace else. Fred's an architect, and architecture is a client-based business. It's difficult to move in architecture. So I started at Christian Theological Seminary and graduated and became co-pastor at my home congregation. When the pastor left, the congregation called me to serve as their pastor. that worked for about 4 years, and then it was obvious that I needed to experience ministry in a context where I had not been known, where I was not still thought of by some as little Judy, where I could stretch and grow and nurture and challenge a congregation in a different way.
Excellent, excellent. So I was going through some files in the office several weeks ago. I wish I had remembered to bring that picture of you to show the to show our audience. But I found a picture of young Judy, and it reminded me that you have been involved in the life of the American Baptist Churches of Greater Indianapolis for decades. Tell us, you were born in Indiana?
Born in Indiana. My parents moved to Indianapolis when I was very young. We started to attend Covenant Baptist Church. That's where I was raised and entered into ministry. That's the church that ordained me in Christian ministry.
So you've been involved in the life of ABCGI your entire life. What are your fondest memories of life in the region back then, and as you look at life in the region now? What are the significant differences? What nostalgia does that memory bring back? What do you miss?
One of the things that I remember as a youth was going to Singspiration. Once a month, the churches in Indianapolis held a gathering for youth groups. We would meet at different churches and sing and fellowship together. That was a rich opportunity. I remember going to what was then College Avenue Baptist Church, where Shirley Alexander's husband then became Frank was pastor there, and then they moved. And going all the way out to Lebanon, going down to Greenwood, going out to Plainfield, visiting and being part of all those churches and connecting with the other youth. That was wonderful. I got involved in ABCGI as an adult by serving on the board and being president of ABCGI at a really young age. Gene Tunn and Larry Sayre put their trust in me, and I so appreciate that. That was a rich and rewarding experience. I remember so much the Christmas parties and how much fun we had. Just the joy of gathering together was important. The annual meetings were always such a blast, just a blast. Now, our region is a picture of the kingdom of God. So beautiful. Growing up was mostly the white churches that participated in things. And now to know, as you read off that list a while ago, the beautiful diversity of who we are. It's so much fun.
We've got a little coffee in the milk or something.
Right. You used to have to go to the biennial to experience the richness of who the American Baptist churches are. And now we can experience right here.
And this reminds me that the American Baptist Churches USA and Puerto Rico is regarded and has been regarded for decades now as the most diverse mainline and perhaps most diverse denomination period in the United States. And the ABCGI is one of the most diverse regions within this denomination. So I second the motion that has just been made, that we are a beautiful people in a beautiful region. We're going to take a break in a moment. We're going to take a break for a moment, and we'll be back with you just in a while. I'm here with Reverend Judy 𝗥𝗲𝗀𝗏, a retired minister of the ABCGI and a former president of the ABC USA and Puerto Rico, and we'll be back in a moment. Well, welcome back to Region Resplendence. With me in the office here today is Judy 𝗥𝗏𝗏𝗏, former pastor in the ABCGI, former president of the ABC USA. We've been having a wonderful conversation. Judy, I want to ask you a little bit about how you came to faith. Tell us about that experience.
I was very much nurtured in the faith from a very young age. Bible stories read to me, prayer time. My parents taught us to tithe with, get 10 cents for
your allowance.
And 1 penny went to the Lord. So nurtured in it that way.
Yeah.
I was in 8th grade when one Sunday morning it just hit me like a bolt of lightning that I wanted to go forward. I wanted to give my life to Christ. I was sobbing. I was so overwhelmed. I was sobbing. I'm a tearful person anyway, but I was sobbing during that service. But I didn't do anything until I had talked with my parents. And we talked it over, and they agreed that I was ready, and I went forward and made my profession of faith.
Yeah, great. So, as I have observed your life for the brief time that I've known you, and as I've come to know you, I have the impression that you live out your faith in ways that, and you could push back on me on this if I'm not correct. I observe someone who lives out her faith in a rare kind of way. So I want to ask you, what might distinguish you in the way that you live out your faith compared to other people in the same faith, in our same faith in Jesus Christ? Because I think I see something a little unique and a little different. What am I seeing?
You're seeing a couple of things. Well, Isaiah 6 certainly was the chapter that called me into ministry. Micah 6:8 and Jesus' words to the scribe in Luke's gospel. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Those two verses have become the guiding principle for my faith. I am a feminist and believe very strongly in women's voice, women's rights, and the gift that women bring, and the inclusion that God had all along for women. So I'm a Christian and I'm a Baptist who heaven is not the only purpose, the end purpose.
Or perhaps not even the primary purpose.
Right, exactly.
Did you hear that, people? No, perhaps not even the primary purpose.
It isn't about heaven.
It's a bonus.
And however, whatever that looks like, we don't know. It is about living intentionally, living in the moment, being present to self and to others with everything that I can have. And I don't always do that successfully. Maybe 5% of the day gets done to that. But that's what the call is. That's what the striving is to be intentionally, live with purpose, serving those on the margins.
So you had to have been thrilled earlier in the year in May when the ABCGI region celebrated our annual gathering, and the scripture verse formed our theme, walking with God, based on Micah 6:8. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God. And you had to be even more thrilled when you discovered that the ABHMS in its Palmer Grant cycle this year is inviting people and regions to submit. Well, the deadline has gone, and ABCGI received the grant based on the same verse, Micah 6:8, doing justice, loving mercy, and walking humbly with God. So you said a little bit about being a feminist. I know for a fact that there are many Christians, including some Baptists, who today are still, first of all, unaware of what it means to be feminist. And because they're not aware of it, there's a prejudicial turn off the moment they hear it. So say some more, convince somebody out there, a female or a male, who is uncomfortable about someone declaring, I'm a feminist. That you could be feminist and Christian. In fact, perhaps being feminist is a genuine and legitimate way to work out your faith in Jesus Christ.
I would say so. Feminist is not an angry, militant, beating people up person. Feminist is someone who fully embraces who she is, gifted and called by God, owning her voice in the world, advocating on behalf of women and all people, particularly of women, advocating on behalf of women who are marginalized, who are in the underpinnings of society, who don't have an opportunity for their voice.
So would you say that there would be no need for feminism if we didn't have misogyny?
Don't know that I would say there would be no need for it. I think nurturing that strong identity is important no matter what.
Okay.
I do think feminist would just be another way of looking at life if misogyny wasn't.
Okay.
If it wasn't on misogyny's back, trying to stop misogyny.
All right. So we're Baptist, and just like feminism, there are lots of Baptists who probably don't understand how great a heritage we have, and what a great foundation we have as Baptists. Many people today join churches not because they're Baptists, join Baptist churches not because they're Baptists, but because they like the preacher, or they like the music, or they were something about. But why are you Baptist, and what keeps you Baptist?
I have said I was born into the Baptist tradition, but I've stayed by choice. When I was in seminary, Christian Theological Seminary is a Disciples of Christ primarily based seminary, had professors who were trying to woo me over to Disciples, saying that there's much more acceptance for women in Disciples of Christ.
Stay in your corner, you losers.
I understood that, but I was firmly planted in who we are, in the desire for soul freedom for each individual, for the autonomy, the church freedom of our churches, for religious freedom. And what became really significant for me, and is significant for me now, is Bible freedom. That we each read Scripture with the Holy Spirit leading and guiding us. We work it out, we tussle and work it together with others. There is no prescribed, you must believe this way. I value that. I value our diversity, even though it is sometimes the greatest struggle that we have as American Baptist churches. I value it.
Yeah, one of the things that arise from Bible freedom, for example, religious freedom, for example, is one of the issues that are at work in the darker side of America today. Would you say that there are folks who even Baptist folks who don't understand that religious freedom involves being a champion for people to be free from religion and to be free from the tyranny that some other religious people, perhaps even Baptist people, may place upon other people. Is that your understanding of religious freedom?
One of the things that struck me years ago was reading an article about how Baptists advocated for the freedom of religion in the Ottoman Empire, meaning Baptists were advocating for Islam in the Ottoman Empire, advocating for the freedom for those people to practice their faith, their religion, and that is so important. That I value that deeply. Because I value also what I can learn from other traditions.
Now, you're no longer the president of the ABC USA, so we're not going to pretend that you're going to speak for the ABC USA. But if you had an opportunity to address all the pastors of the ABC USA and several of the chief lay leaders, deacons, top-ranking leaders of the ABC USA, if they said, Reverend Følgenthal, come address us and talk to us about anything the Lord has laid on your mind, what kinds of things, what kinds of issues might you raise, bearing in mind where we are in 2024 in America and in the world?
I would encourage us to dig deep in understanding those Baptist roots. Claiming those again, so we understand we may not see things the same in all of our circles of Baptist family, yet we can be accepting and loving of each other. We're still working on that, Win. Every time I think we've made progress in that, it feels like we've taken some steps backwards. When I was president, I had a metaphor, an analogy that I used that I think is still true for us, and it goes back to my music roots. I pictured an orchestra, and the different instruments in an orchestra represent individual congregations. Autonomous. Each instrument can play a solo. They don't usually play that at the same time.
Right.
Instruments are in sections. There's the brass, the woodwinds, the percussion, the strings. And those sections, I think, were representative of our regions and of our partners in ABC USA. For me, one of the most beautiful things of hearing a symphony is when the concert master comes on stage, cues the oboe plays that beautiful note, and everyone tunes to it. First, everybody is on the same note, getting that pitch exactly right. Then it fills out into a beautiful chord. The concert master is like maybe the general secretary of our wonderful family. Once tuned, the conductor comes out. God is our conductor. God is who is leading us and cueing us and guiding us in making beautiful music together. That's a picture that I hold as the beautiful representation of who we are.
I'm thinking about an additional thing to that. I mean, I am partial to the bass line in many types of music, but if I get to the point where I say, listen, I want only the bass line, we're not going to have any music.
Exactly.
We gotta accept all the other instruments that play that create the symphony. Wonderful. So my years in seminary were among the best years of my life. what was your journey like through seminary, and how did that how has that made an impact on your ministry, on your whole ministry?
Oh my, absolute impact on my ministry. It was, on the one hand, it was very eye-opening. I was learning a worldview, a theological view that was not what I grew up with at all.
So there's value to I mean, and I think one of the things about my experience is that I attended an interdenominational seminary, even though I was Baptist. Is that what I'm hearing your experience?
Yes, it was amazing. I was learning about grace from a new perspective. I was learning the richness of church history. I was learning beautiful Hebrew words like hesed that
Yes.
just evokes the wonder of who God is and how God works in our lives. I read Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. was introduced to womanist theology. Such openness and diversity. And while it was very different, it felt like I came home.
Wow.
It felt like I was.
It took you back to what your mother was doing that day when
It was.
when the mom police showed up.
Right. And when I was in high school with this diverse group of students. And yes, it did. It took me back, and I really became who I was called to be.
Yeah. Judy, what is America missing? America that loves to say that it is Christian. America whose largest evangelical denomination is Baptist, Southern Baptist. America where still about 80% of white evangelicals are said to be still supporting you know who. What is America missing from the perspective of the diversity that you have experienced, the diversity that our region is, the harmony in that diversity, the power in that diversity, the beauty in that diversity? We love to, so if I had my druthers, I would say America the Beautiful is a better choice for our national anthem, but that's way beyond my pay grade. But we talk about how beautiful, for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, and we talk from sea to shining sea. Those are pictures of diversity.
They are.
Different types of, we're in fall, and look at the colors out there. What is America missing? Being endowed with diverse peoples, and yet that is problematic. What's the problem?
I think the problem is fear. I think white people, I'm going to be honest here, most particularly white male people, are terrified of losing power and influence as our country grows in that diversity. I think the country could take a lesson from ABC USA. We're the denomination that now ethnic groups, non-white people, are the majority of our denomination. We're this beautiful picture.
Yeah.
I think our country can accept that, claim it, celebrate it, and look for the ways it enriches what it means to be American. It also is a call to return to constitutional values. What is separation of church and state?
Which was articulated by Baptists in Danbury, Connecticut, several centuries ago. I think you're on to something there, and I'm wondering, because many of the white males you reference are Christian males.
Yes.
So I'm still trying to understand what they're missing. It's a question. It's a question for us to answer. I'm talking with Judith 𝗥𝗲𝗀𝗏, and we're going to take one more break and come back and wrap up our conversation. Stay with us. We're back here in our final segment of Region Resplendence, our very first in the series with the Reverend Judith 𝗥𝗲𝗀𝗏. Judy, in less than 3 weeks' time, our nation will experience what many people are calling the election, most important election of our life. And one of the major issues at play in American life and reality now is something called Christian nationalism. What's wrong with Christian nationalism?
Before I say what I think might be wrong with it, let me say what my concern is with
Sure.
that language. I think Christian people, good folks, going to churches all across our country, hear the cry to become Christian nationalists, and they think, it's Christian. It must be good.
You think they confuse being nationalist with being patriotic, and they conflate nationalism with patriotism, and
Yes.
and probably don't even understand the cancer or the non-benign nature of nationalism.
Exactly.
Especially being a person of Christian faith, following Jesus.
Exactly. So I don't think they understand that nationalism takes us down a path that is putting everybody in the same box, saying everybody has to believe the same thing, their faith has to look the same, check off this list.
And for Baptists, that flies in the face of soul freedom, biblical freedom, religious freedom. You can't be Baptist. You can't be Baptist and Christian nationalist, correct?
You cannot. You cannot.
Yeah.
That concerns me greatly. I'm praying very hard for this election.
I don't know. I mean, I'm just an ordinary immigrant, but one of the things I've observed about America is something that I think immigrants tend to pick up pretty quickly. First of all, immigrants tend to know the American Constitution a little bit better than many born here, because we've got to study it in order to appear before the INS officer to raise our right hand and swear an oath. And that's the other thing that many born Americans have never taken an oath, because they say that only 2% of Americans at any one time serve in the military or serve in anything that requires an oath. But one of the things I have noticed is how deficient Americans born here, and especially I'm sorry to say it, especially in the church, how many Christians are a little deficient in logical thinking. In fact, it was one of the things I think I addressed in yesterday's intersections. Logical thinking, in historical information and knowledge, and religious literacy. I'd recommend a book written by Stephen Prothero called Religious Literacy. And I think, what would you say about, given your journey through this faith, your journey through seminary, your national leadership, what have you observed about those things I've just mentioned? Where can Americans improve their broadness of knowledge so that we might be better followers of Jesus?
I think Jesus invites us to think, and to think deeply. The parables are an example of that. They seem so simple on the surface, but there is so much more if you dig down into a parable. That requires some research, some questioning. I think if we were willing to question things like, why did God say, love your neighbor as yourself? What does that mean? And that would take us back to Leviticus, which is the source of that verse.
Yeah.
And to understand the context of the Hebrew people coming out of the wilderness into the promised land and being told to welcome the stranger that comes into their midst, because you were a stranger in another land. You know what it's like to be left out, to be oppressed, to be treated like dirt. So welcome these people when they come to you. If we were thinking and doing that kind of looking, that's called critical thinking. If we were doing that, I think people would be less willing to take things at face value that they're being told. And I mean that across lines. That's not a one party or another party thing. It means do your work.
Yeah. You know, there's a branch of theology called etiology or etiology, from the Greek word aiteo, I ask, I question. And when I graduated from seminary, I went back to my homeland. I trained elsewhere, went back to my homeland thinking I was going to be the answer man. But the longer I ministered and the longer I have been in the faith, I've come to find that answers are overrated. Questions are underrated. And very often Jesus would answer a question with a question. And something else I've noticed, the Shema in Deuteronomy, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might. When Jesus repeats that in the New Testament, he adds a fourth thing. You love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, might, and mind. And I often wonder if Jesus, assuming that he was, omniscient, just knew that in the 21st century there were going to be a group of people called Christians who would not be using their mind as much as they should. But it's really something we need to do a lot more. I wonder how much people like us and our colleagues in our profession really help people to stretch their imaginations. And of course, one of the answers to my own question is that some congregations don't like and don't allow their pastors to push them, to stretch them. And if you're listening to us today, take this as an invitation. If you're a person in a congregation, don't send your pastor away when they take you along some avenues that may make you uncomfortable. In fact, Jesus, for much of his ministry, made his hearers uncomfortable. In fact, very early in his ministry, when he said something, one of the first acts he did was something that made the people so mad that they were about to tear him apart, and he disappeared out of their presence. So, one more thing about the times in which we are, Judy. So there's an election coming up. What would you say if you were invited to be an advisor to the next president of the United States? It's a lot of imagination we're inviting here now, folks. Especially if the next president of the United States were a he. What would you say? Where would you take the president if you were his advisor? And throw in a couple of things if the next president was a she.
When when you asked that question, I had a prepared answer, but what immediately came to mind was Dickens' A Christmas Story. And I would love to see the president going through those kinds of experiences that invite, open up the heart, because it has to be in the heart.
Yeah.
It has to be opening up the heart and the mind to see America, to see the world in a different way, in a way that would then invite the president to listen, and not just to advisors, but listen to the people, to the cries of the people. I would invite the president to start any solution from the perspective of the very bottom people in our country. The poorest, the most oppressed, the least of these, to start a solution with what works for them, rather than starting with a solution at the level of the top.
That may not be a solution in the long run.
Right. I think if you're looking out for what works for the least of these, it's going to bubble up and work for
It's
everyone.
kind of like Jesus. Jesus was all, in a big crowd, he always spotted the marginalized and the outcast in the crowd. And when he was in the crowd and was in the house and couldn't see, there were some friends who came and dropped a man in the midst. But in order for the president to have that Scrooge experience, that Christmas story experience, and to have an inner expulsion rather than an outward compulsion, because the advisors can't change the president's mind. In order for the president, male or female, to listen to the people of the grassroots, the people of the grassroots ought to have a sense of whether the person they choose as president has the capacity to listen, has the capacity, has demonstrated any capacity to be expelled on the inside by the work of the Spirit. And that's something we can't make happen.
We can't make happen. The president needs to have compassion for all people. The president needs to have a discerning heart and mind. I think a president needs a spiritual director. And I know that segues us into something else in a moment.
It does.
But I think a president needs not a spiritual advisor as much as someone who helps the president listen to what God is tugging at and calling in their heart. And you don't have to be Christian to do that. The president can be any religion and still seek direction.
In fact, all leaders, both civic and spiritual, need spiritual direction and need a time of contemplation and reflection. So you are a spiritual director. Tell us how you were led into that ministry. What is involved in that ministry, and what people who access that type of ministry expect to receive from people like you.
I was led to seek spiritual direction when I was going through a time of crisis in career, and that was also then crisis in faith. I thought I knew for sure what God wanted me to do. That wasn't what God wanted me to do. I was angry with God. I was questioning God. I was questioning life. And a wise, trusted friend said, have you been in spiritual direction? Well, not a lot of Protestants know about spiritual direction.
Yeah.
But I sought out a director, and it was a safe place. I could go, and this wonderful Catholic laywoman, and now my second director is another wonderful Catholic laywoman, listens to me and asks open-ended questions to help me find what God is calling
to you.
and saying to me.
Yeah.
Not telling me what God is saying to me. I like to say that there are three beings present in the room for spiritual direction. The director, who's listening to the person, the directee, who comes seeking direction, and the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And it is a movement, it is a dance among the three of helping the person listen more deeply.
Would you say that the way you said that not a lot of Protestants, and it gets worse if you say not a lot of evangelicals, and Baptists have Baptists straddle both the main line and the evangelical. I mean, everywhere I've been in the world, Baptists have have one foot in one camp. So we're both evangelical and mainline. Would you say that one of the reasons that Protestants and evangelicals don't engage or haven't even thought of or don't believe in, at worst, spiritual direction is because of the way we've been taught, number one, to pray, which is always to speak, to speak, to speak, to speak, to speak. Secondly, in the way we worship, noise, 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 noise. And thirdly, in the way we've been taught to evangelize, tell, 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 tell. Is that part of the issue? We haven't learned to pray by shutting up and listening. We're not Quakers, so we haven't learned to worship in silence. Evangelism is not tell me your story, let me tell you how to be saved. Is that part of the problem?
I think it is. I think it's very difficult to turn that mindset to understanding prayer at least as a two-way conversation. That's why I love the practice of Lectio Divina, where you spend time in Scripture and you listen to what that word, that passage is nudging in you, and recognize that that's God's Spirit beginning to niggle at your heart and your mind to say, maybe this is what I'm asking of you. That's a wonderful example of the two-way street. I practice centering prayer, a time of sitting, getting my heart and my mind quiet, trying to chase the monkeys out of my brain, and receive what God is offering me, rather than treating God like a teller at the bank. I need this, 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 and this. Thank you, I've got it, now I'll go. But listening.
One of the most powerful types of experiences is when someone trained in that skill and in that ministry instructs us to, first of all, become aware of the air we're breathing, become aware of the chair you're sitting on, aware of the ground, aware of, just become aware. Especially we who believe that God is everywhere and God is present in the person next to us and so on. What a gift. Julie, before we close, is there something else on your mind? Is there, if you had one last word for our viewers, is there something you want to leave with them?
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your might and your mind. love your neighbor as yourself. That's the good news in a nutshell.
And he pushes it a little further and says, and love one another as I have loved you. Good news, being good news, bearing good news. How could you bear good news without being good news? So I'm reminding us Christians that we are the good news. And we want to thank you for joining us for this portion of time, this first in the series of Region Resplendence. We want to thank you so much, Judy. Bless you. Thank you so much.
Michael.
Give Fred our greetings. Say hi to Jeremy and to your daughter and to the family. Thank you for joining us. And watch again for the next in the series, Region Resplendence, a program of the American Baptist Churches of Greater Indianapolis. Bless you now and take care. God bless.